Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm Dean Jones, your host. Today is season 6, episode 16. Hope you're all having a great spring out. I want to really say I had a great time talking to chef nutritionist Micah Siva. She could also be called a well-traveled person. I think I teased her and said that she was like Carmen Sandiego because she's been to more than 50 locations around the globe. I love talking to this Canadian expat, now a local Bay Area person. Micah has an enchanting and really fun manner that put me well at ease when I was talking to her. I also got to hear her dog Buckwheat, who's a sheepadoodle, bark. I really enjoy dogs, so I always like having them be part of the podcast. Micah had a lot to say on nutrition, food writing, and growing up cooking with family members. I think you'll enjoy getting to know blogger Siva. I think that she's going to be a big name, and I think that you're going to be seeing quite a bit of her in the future. So I'm going to go right to my conversation with Micah Siva. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I'm speaking with Micah Siva, a registered dietitian and chef living in Northern California, specializing in recipe writing, food photography, and storytelling through food. Micah, thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I have a lot of questions to ask you, but I wanted to start off by asking about being from Canada. What part of Canada are you from?
So I'm originally from Western Canada in Calgary. I grew up there, and then I went to school in Eastern Canada in Nova Scotia and lived in Toronto most recently up until 2018. So a little bit of the whole country, I guess, from east to west.
Now, how did you end up living in Northern California?
So my husband has been relocated for work quite often. So in 2018, we moved to the UK. We lived in London for 2 years. And then fun. And then we moved to San Diego actually in March 2020. And it just so happened the first day we could get to the US was March 12th, 2020. So needless to say, we didn't really settle in. It was a little bumpy of an introduction to a new place. And then we had the opportunity to move up here to San Francisco this past summer. So I've been here since June 2021. I think we're in 2022 right now. So I'm pretty fresh to Northern California, and it's taken me a little while to get here, but I'm so happy to be here. I'm loving the food. The weather, I think, is great. And I've found it just to be such a dynamic city to live in. I think it's my favorite so far.
Now, I'm from San Diego originally. How did you like living in San Diego?
So the weather, you can't beat that. It was sunny every day. It was lovely to be outside during COVID, but making a community or friends during that time was pretty next to none. So It was a little challenging in some ways, but we were so lucky to be able to take advantage of the nature and the beach during a time where a lot of people were stuck inside. So it had its pluses and minuses, but I think that San Francisco is a much better fit for us in terms of what we like to do and kind of food scene as well.
You were a trained chef who graduated from a Natural Gourmet Institute of ICE in New York. Can we talk about your training in New York and where you've worked?
For sure, yeah. So I went to NGI when it was still an independent school, and that was about 10 or 11 years ago. And I was fresh, I was young, I was excited to be in New York, never really been there at all. And at that time, I was a longtime vegetarian who had been on and off again vegan. So that's really why I chose that school, because it specialized in more of those alternative diets, which was really ahead of its time. Now it's so common to find those plant-based options or gluten-free baking courses, but at that point, it still really wasn't the norm. And so I chose NGI for that very reason. And we did so many unique things that are a little bit more commonplace now. After school, I interned at a restaurant called Dirt Candy, which is a well-known vegetarian restaurant in New York, actually owned by a Canadian woman, Amanda Cohen. And she's incredible. Like, it was such a cool experience. At that point, it was just a 5 to 10 table restaurant. So I was just doing all the prep. Like I helped her develop an eggplant tiramisu, like so peculiar. But it was also during that time that I read Kitchen Confidential and understood that I'm not the kind of person who would survive in a kitchen. I'm way too sensitive. And at that point, also, my student visa was about to expire because I was a Canadian student in the US. So I learned that my time in New York was as well. And at that point, I just decided to go back to college, or to college in general, and become a dietitian and start studying nutrition. So I didn't do the restaurant thing, but during college, I definitely worked in the food industry. I did catering on the side. I catered a lot of professors' dinner parties. And I also worked in an incubation center in Canada to develop food products. So I'm not the restaurant kind of gal. And I knew that pretty early on, probably day one of culinary school.
So, how have you liked being a dietitian? Has it been, like, opened up any like questions for you and ideas about food? How did it change your life studying to be a dietitian?
So it was always an interest of mine. I was always interested in nutrition, and I'd always experienced like my fair share of, let's say, gut issues growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first wanted to go vegetarian, my parents set me up with a dietitian to talk about how we can do that in a good way as a family. We had a lot of experiences with dietitians in general. Say being a dietitian actually made me a lot more relaxed around food. It made me understand that there wasn't one right way to eat, there wasn't one right way to do things. And I think it really took what I learned at school, which was how to make food taste good, and gave me a little bit of background about what foods are best for us and where does that fit in with our day-to-day living. Instead of just eating delicious restaurant food or restaurant quality food once in a while, how can we make that experience sustainable for us to do more often and do at home? So I think that it really helped me get a better holistic view of food and what people might be interested in, and be able to talk about food in a unique way. And I worked as a dietitian afterwards and for a couple years, and I used my culinary background to teach cooking classes, and whether it was to people in senior homes to kids in kindergarten, there was always a fun way to connect through food. And I think that that's really what I learned from both aspects of my education, was that food is something that we all need. Most of us love it. And it's such a good way to connect with people and relay a message. And that was really one thing that I took from becoming a dietitian in that path.
You moved into writing, and you started on your wonderful blog, Nosh with Micah, where you have blogs, newsletters, you have a lot of different features to it. It's really well done, very beautiful looking website. How did you foray from that into writing? Where did that come in for you?
So I started my blog when it first started. I started it as a nutrition blog only. So Nutrition X Kitchen, where I was trying to make healthy foods. And that really came about because when I was working as a dietitian counseling all day, even though I had that connection through food and was talking about food all day, I was sometimes just way too tired to do anything exciting when I got home. And I found myself eating like eggs and toast for dinner 3 days a week because I was exhausted. And I had said to my husband, I was like, I feel like I need something creative. I feel like I need to do something that sets me apart, like for other job prospects, but also just like gives me a little bit more playfulness when it comes to food. So I started it just as an Instagram account, taking photos on my phone. And then I didn't even share the recipes at that point. Then people would ask for the recipes. So I started with like a really ugly, disgustingly ugly, simple blog, and just very chicken scratch with the recipes out for that reason. And then to realize that like actually this is a lot of fun and I enjoy writing, and I never really understood that I liked writing so much until I just started to put pen to paper and realize that like I love describing food and I love talking about food. And if it's something I think about all the time anyways, like why am I not collecting my thoughts somewhere? So It really happened slowly and organically for me to make it into more of a career. It was never something that I intended on doing. I really just wanted to feel more creative and inspired to cook at home. And it was really a natural progression to turn it into Nosh with Micah. So I recently rebranded myself from just the plain old nutrition blog with healthy foods and whatnot to focus more on plant-based, plant form, I call it Jewish cuisine. Over the past year, I made that conscious decision, then finally took the plunge in December of this past year, so 2021, to go fully into that very specific niche of plant form or Jewish cuisine.
You write recipes very well, and I talk about this a lot with my guests because it's something that is not even across the internet. We see lots of different recipes, and some people are good at them, some aren't. I've written recipes myself, and I stopped doing it because I realized I wasn't very good at it. And I think there's definitely a learning curve, and like, some people are better than others at it. How did you come into it, and did you have like a certain attitude, or did you do research before you started writing recipes?
So a lot of the recipe writing skills I do think I got while I was at NGI in culinary school. We had a big portion of how to, I guess, technically write a recipe. And then so much of it has just come from reading recipe books like their magazines, and B, practice. And so I've been writing recipes, essentially at least one recipe a day since I started my blog over 5 years, about 5 years ago. So that's a whole lot of recipes, and that's before I even started to do it as a career. So I think so much of it just comes from practice, and also just thoughtfulness of like where you're putting your words and in which order your words are going, to make sure that when a reader reads it, they understand what they'll need and what they need to do in a clear and concise way, so that they feel prepared and capable. And I think that those are really the main things that I try to do. And also knowing that there's always going to be mistakes, and just sometimes putting it out there, I'll reread it. I'll be like, oh, whoops. And I'll just have to go back in and fix it. And that's something I've also come to learn, is that done is better than perfect. And there's so many times where I'll reread something and I'll be like, oh, I don't know what I was thinking. And I'll just have to go back and edit and re-look at it and see if I still like it. I might retest it. And that's such a huge part of writing recipes, because it's always up for reevaluation and retesting. So I think just also being nice to yourself.
That's
what I've learned.
Now, besides the recipes being very well written, they have beautiful pictures in them, which you've taken. How did you get started in food photography? Is it something you did out of necessity, or you decided you wanted to try and do it creatively?
So a little bit of both. So I first started just out of trying to be creative. As a kid, I was always that artsy one who never did a sport. I was in art classes most nights a week. Friday nights were like art nights. And I love art and looking at things and painting, and I just love it. So it was really a natural thing where it was another kind of craft for me to play around with. And so it really started on like my super old iPhone by a window in our apartment. And then after I realized like, hey, this is kind of fun, I'm kind of enjoying this, then I would play around like my old hobby camera, digital camera that I got probably in 2002. And then once I realized that I was actually enjoying just the physical act of taking a photo, this was before I even learned how to edit anything. I attended YouTube University. I watched a ton of videos on different composition. I was reading books, and I was just playing around with it. And I think the biggest thing that got me to where I am today is that, just like writing the recipes, I was practicing this almost every day. Even if I was just eating my toast and eggs, which I still do and love for dinner, I'm plating it nicely, or I'm doing something to like think about what it looks like. And I realized that having that attention to detail and care about my food made me also just enjoy it a little bit more. And so it was a really full circle moment of like, I'm making something more interesting, I'm taking more time and care, and I'm actually enjoying eating. I love eating it a little bit more now that take time into it. So it was also kind of a mindfulness practice where I'm honoring the food in some way by making it look nice and presenting it in a way that makes me super excited to eat it. So I think that I've also learned that sometimes the photo I take on my iPhone is just as good as the one with my full setup, and that you don't necessarily need fancy equipment to get into it or to get started. You have to appreciate the food that you're taking the photo of. And sometimes the close-up one that I put on my Instagram story makes me more hungry than like the beautifully styled one that I do and then edit like 3 days later after it's long gone and the taste is just a memory. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it and how I've progressed. Yeah.
Do you have any tips on food photography for people that are getting into it?
So I would say one, kind of appreciating the food and just getting started no matter what kind of camera or skill you feel like you have. Learning the basics, like the different ideas of like lighting, like using natural light instead of artificial light, using different textures and colors and movement, and just like try to think of what story you want to tell with the food. Like every single dish in my mind has a memory and a story that can go along with it. And so try to convey that with whether it's props or lighting or something that you do in the photo process to make it so that it's not just another plate of cookies. It's like a plate of cookies for Santa, or it's a cookies for a family holiday, or it's something that evokes some sort of emotion or memory, which feels like a hefty first tip, but I would say just use your phone, I guess. Use your phone camera and that's totally enough.
Now, some of your recipes that I've seen have a reference to you developing modern Jewish recipes that were inspired by your grandmother, obviously with a plant-forward twist. Talk to us about your grandmother and what influence she had on you as a chef.
So my grandma, Eva, she was a fantastic cook, and she showed her love through food, 100%. Like you knew that she loved you if she's trying to stuff more down your throat. And she definitely loved us. And she was so she was amazing, and she's the biggest inspiration for me in the kitchen. And when we were kids, we'd go visit my grandma. My sister and I would fly by ourselves from Calgary to Vancouver, which is where they lived, as unaccompanied minors, and we would spend 10 days at Camp Grandma and Grandpa. I thought it was just really cool, but I'm sure my parents were like, yes, we just got 10 free days of babysitters. We can go do whatever we want.
Yeah.
But my grandparents, I know, my grandparents would plan all of these fun things for us. That we would go raspberry picking, and then we would make raspberry jam, and then we would make little thimble cookies using that jam. Then she would teach us how to make chicken soup. We'd roast chickens. We would make all of these recipes that she would have learned from her mother, who was named Frida, and just share her love of food with us. So we would be braiding challah with her, we'd be making cookies, we'd be making just about everything, probably gaining 20 pounds over that 10 days. And she just really loved feeding us. And I would say 90% of my memories with her are food memories. And it goes from folding kreplach together. Even when I brought my now husband home for the first time, she was getting older, and I wanted us to have a memory together of her teaching the two of us how to make her kreplach, or like soup dumplings, together. So she's like sitting in her walker and like hitting on my then boyfriend, and because she's a very sassy lady, and we're folding these little kreplach, and she's telling me that when I'm done with Josh, my husband, she wants to have her way with him. And it's just like this, such a sweet, funny memory that I have of her. And so every time I make kreplach, I think of her, and she really instilled that love of food and winning people's hearts through their stomach. And after she passed, while we were living in London, and in Jewish custom, you have to be buried within 72 hours. Right. And she passed away the night before the Jewish New Year, which meant that she had to be buried before that happened. So it was very quick. Right. And so we couldn't fly home. It was logistically, there was no possible way for us to get home. So that day I just like made dozens and dozens and dozens of krapulach and thought of that memory of us all spending those afternoons together, baking and doing all of those food related things and thinking about the things that she taught me through her food. So she's such a huge inspiration, and she's just like I don't even know if it's just an inspiration. I can't even think of the word because I'm getting like emotional, but she's such a huge part of why I love doing what I do. And it's been really special to go back through her recipe book, which is the one thing I wanted to inherit, and just like think of her and think of ways that I would make these that would make me still excited to eat them as someone in 2022 and not in the 30s. 1930s is when she would have been a teenager, and look for ways to honor her in a way. Look for ways to honor her in a way that I can see keeping her alive in a way that still feels authentic to who I am. So that's kind of where she goes from. So I know that as we're prepping for Passover today, she's definitely like excited that I'm able to spend the holiday with my parents this year and share my love for food with others as well.
Do you have any favorite things that she made that you really liked?
She made, I don't even know what other people call them, but we called them sweet nothings and just nothings. And they're kind of like a whipped, they're kind of like a cookie, but they're very mild, and we call them sweet nothings. So that's one. And then another is these, we call them mun cookies. They're almost like little sour cream, soft cookies with poppy seeds in them.
Oh, it sounds amazing.
Her mom came from what is now Ukraine. She fled Ukraine as a teenager, and so most of the foods that she would have made for us came from Eastern Europe. So some of them had names that I think somebody made up along the way, or they were the traditional name that I don't necessarily know the English version of. But she really made everything that was meat and potatoes, but also really great sweets.
This episode is sponsored by Culinary Historians of Northern California, a Bay Area educational group dedicated to the study of food, drink, and culture in human history. To learn more about this organization and their work, please visit their website at www.chnorcal.org. Your recipes that you write span the spectrum from breakfast to dessert, salads to baking. Is there a type of cooking that you like more than others that you really groove with?
I really love making vegetables taste good. I love making vegetable-based dishes that are exciting and not just your average salad, I suppose. So that's a lot of fun for me to play around with. But I also love baking challah. This year, I'm trying to make different kind every week. So I'm trying to make 52 different variations of challah. So I have a
52
freezer full of challah because there's only 2 of us.
Oh my God.
So this will be the only week that I miss because of Passover, but I'll make 2 the next week. I'll go for it. And it's been a lot of fun to play around with trying to make challah and enjoy that every week. My neighbors love me.
I was going to say.
Yeah, they really like me. And so I've really been having a fun time doing that, because I think sometimes bread feels a little bit scary. And even for myself, it always felt like something I couldn't fit in. And so trying to make time for it and look for ways to make it quick and still delicious and different has been a lot of fun. So it's taking the shortcuts, using the instant yeast, doing only one rise. Like, I think that in a lot of ways, we kind of just need to demystify the process of making bread. And that's what I've been trying to do so that I don't get burnt out making 52 different types of challah this year.
Many of your recipes are gluten-free. And We're kind of blessed because in the Bay Area, we have a lot of wonderful bakeries, and you could get gluten-free items in the store, like at Safeway. So like as example, you can get all kinds of stuff to do gluten-free baking now. It's not like it was like 20 years ago. And I've talked to a lot of bakers and recipe writers who've done gluten-free, and I think for them there was a learning curve. Was there a learning curve for you? And did you try out a lot of different things to kind of perfect your method?
For sure, yeah. And a big part of it was that we did a lot of gluten-free baking at NGI. And when I bake gluten-free, I really try to use flours that also have some sort of nutritional benefit to them. I'm not personally gluten-free. And so when I bake gluten-free, it's because I want to use flours that maybe are higher in fiber or protein or have a different taste. So that's really where my interest in gluten-free baking comes, is using things like coconut or almond flour, which have their own benefits. And so that's what I like to play around with as well, kind of putting my dietitian hat back on during those times. But definitely there is that learning curve of like, okay, so if I over mix it, it won't be a problem because I'm not developing gluten. But then also there is no gluten. So what can I add so that it doesn't just crumble like sand in my hands?
Yeah.
And there is definitely that scientific part about it. And through that, it's either being experimentation, a lot of messes, but then also just a lot of reading about different ingredients and trying different things out in a way that work texture wise, taste wise, but also I try to always add something that's a little bit healthy in there if it's possible. So that's a big part of it as well.
I wanted to ask you a big question now. This is probably the most important question of the interview. It says you're a dog mom. Let's ask about your dog.
So my dog is the best thing that ever happened to me. Josh, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I love you too. But I have a mini sheepadoodle, which is the cutest breed.
Oh my
and
God.
His name is Buckwheat, like the grain.
I love that.
He's almost 2. He turns 2 in July, and he's my best friend. He tastes all of my food.
Nice.
Even when I cork a bottle of wine, I let him smell the cork so that he gets a refined palate. That's very important to me. And he is just the little sweetest boy in the world. So I feature him most days on my Instagram because I'm so obsessed with him. And he is, I think, the only reason I've made friends in the past 2 years, because he's so cute that people want to say hi.
Yeah, San Francisco is a good dog walking town. There's a lot of dog trails and stuff like that, and people really respect dogs here.
Yeah, I've read that there's more dogs than children in the city, which I believe.
Yeah, and there's all these places like there's all kinds of doggy daycares for people who work, and there's like just it's really a great city for dogs. It's really a good place. Yeah.
Yeah, he gets better. He's treated much better than I've ever been.
Now, your bio says you're a consummate traveler. And so just talking to you about the places you lived, I was already kind of blown away. But then I read you've been to over 50 countries. Holy moly, that's a lot. Like you're like Carmen San Diego. What's it been like traveling all over the world? You must have like one of those passports. It's like all kind of bulky with stamps and stuff.
Yeah, I definitely have my fair share of stamps, and travel's been a big thing that fuels me, and it's really what I love. It energizes me and it makes me excited, and I love eating in different places. I travel to eat. I'm one of those people that before I look at the historical sites, I look at where the restaurants are that I want to eat, and then I fit them in between the restaurants. So I like to walk until I'm hungry, eat, and then walk until I'm hungry again, and then eat more. So essentially, when I travel, I'm just walking all day so that I get more hungry and I can eat at more places. And it's been a ton of fun, especially living in London. It was quite easy to go away for the weekend and go to different places that we wouldn't necessarily travel across the globe for. Like we went to Latvia for a week because there was a cheap flight, and it was incredible and we loved it. Or I went to Cyprus for a weekend with a girlfriend because it was like a cheap flight again and we were available. And so there's so many places that I've been able to visit, and I've been very fortunate to do so because we were living in Europe, or what was Europe at the time. Now it's its own thing. But that's definitely been a huge highlight, and just tasting different foods and Also, I would try to do cooking classes in most places that I went to when it was available. So learning from people on like Airbnb experiences. I love those cooking classes because you usually just go to someone's house and you make food with whoever lives there, and which I love. And of course that was pre-COVID when like I would hug strangers and like share food with them. I do that less now. But it's been a ton of fun to try different foods, then bring different ingredients back home with you. So I love travel mostly because I love the different foods. So I love hiking, and mostly because it makes me hungry, and and checking out different places to hike and interact with people that are just different than I am.
Did you have any, what is your biggest food epiphany? Was there anything that you've tried that you'd never had before that you're like, oh my God, this is amazing?
That's a fantastic question. I don't know if there's been an epiphany, but there's like specific bites that I've had that there's buckwheat.
There's buckwheat.
Yeah. My Instacart is here, as per usual. There's specific bites that I've had that really have stuck with me. So I would say that one of them was a few years ago, we spent Passover in Slovenia. And the day before Passover started, there was this like big farmers market, and we love Slovenia. Like the people were just so kind, and it was so beautiful there. Everything, it was just like a little utopia. And so we went to this farmers market, and it was our last meal before Passover. And of course, I had like 3 boxes of matzah in our suitcase. Like I basically had like socks, underwear, and matzah with me, and that's all. And so there was this individual who was selling this like poppy seed roll cake, and you just bought it by weight. And I love poppy seed everything. And so we bought this slice, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is way too big. We'll never finish it all. And I just sat on a street corner eating like a pound of poppy seed roll. And it was one of the best desserts I've ever had ever in my whole life. Just like this street poppy seed roll. And it was mind blowing. So I would say that was not even a food epiphany. It was just like, it gives you this experience to try foods in a different way with a different setting, and you can really just sit and experience it for all that it is, for where it's coming from as well, and just have these memories that are tied to food that are just really, really special. So I don't know if that's an epiphany, but it was just like I'm salivating thinking about that poppy seed.
No, this isn't a scripted question, but I lived in England myself a long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
and people always trash talk England about the food, and it makes me crazy because, you know, I mean, every country has its good and bad points, but I've never eaten as well as I've eaten in England. What was your experience like living in London and having all this like Waitrose and all these different places, Sainsbury's, everything like that? And just, well, what would you think about living in England and like living in London? How was the food there for you?
I honestly thought the quality of the food was fantastic because you got all of this. First of all, like the produce and a lot of the English made products are really nice. Like the things I would do for a crumpet right now, or you don't want to know,
Yeah.
or like the Jersey butter or the
Yeah.
cheeses, or even some like of these English sparkling wines are incredible.
Yeah.
And then also you get all of these amazing products from Europe, and it's so much closer. So it's easy to get those like Spanish oranges or like spices from different places. So I thought the food was awesome. And I think especially with London, it's that you can get anything you ever wanted. And that some of the chefs that are coming into London from these different countries, they're bringing the best of what their country has to offer and opening a restaurant because it's a lot easier to, or has been a lot easier in the past, to move to the UK and bring some of their expertise and knowledge there. So like the Indian restaurants in London, the Middle Eastern restaurants, Israeli restaurants, Spanish restaurants, like it's a garbage truck and I know.
It's okay, we can have that out.
Okay. So just the restaurant scene as well in London is so fantastic. So I really enjoyed the food, and seriously, like I have been missing crumpets since we left. So I say that those people have probably never been to the right places in the UK, and they might have been the people who are also in the US thinking that Pizza Hut is the best pizza in the country. So I don't know.
Yeah. What's your next travel destination? Do you know yet?
We've got a lot of Canadian travel upcoming for some family events, but I'm meant to be going to Israel but we're also going to Chile in December. Ooh. So we've got some big travel plans coming up, which I'm very excited about. And I'm going to Toronto, but I don't know if that counts as much. More just to see some friends I haven't seen for some time. But Israel and Chile this year.
That sounds wonderful. Who are some of your favorite food writers that you like to read that really kind of inspire you?
So I'm
here.
Oh, okay, great. So Kenji Lopez Alt has been a huge one that I've followed him for quite some time. Do you want me to re-say that?
Yeah, please. Sorry.
So in terms of food writers, I've been a Serious Eats reader for a long time. I love to learn the why behind everything. I'm a very curious person. So Kenji Lopez Alt has been a huge inspiration. Also, Nick Sharma just came out with a fantastic book last year, which I'm obsessed with.
Yeah.
And then I'd say those are my two writers that I've been reading the most often, but I also just am such a Serious Eats fan. I think it's such a cool medium to share the why of why food tastes good. And yeah, Serious Eats, big shout out to Serious Eats. They're killing it.
So I normally ask people a closing question of what are you having for dinner tonight? But I know you're probably cooking for Passover. So is it out of line to ask what you're having for Passover?
No, not at all. This Passover, we're doing a plant-forward Passover, of course. So I've got matzo balls balling currently. Nice. Instead of gefilte fish here, instead of gefilte fish, I'm making little codfish cakes. And then I'm pickling some hard-boiled eggs with beet juice and horseradish.
Oh, I love that.
And then I've got a salad with like a horseradish dressing that I make. I'm also making some fondant sweet potatoes with pecan crumble on top. I'm making cauliflower schnitzel. I'm making this like big dish of roasted mushrooms with too much butter for anyone's health. And I've made a Meyer lemon almond sponge cake. And it's like umami almond flour brownies, and also matzah caramel crack is what we call it.
Yes.
And I am always fearful of not having enough food. So I might also make another salad, and I also might make another dessert because I would hate for anyone to leave hungry. So that's
that just sounds incredible. My God, I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Micah, I really want to thank you for being on the program, and Buckwheat also for being on the program.
It's a pleasure.
I really had a great time talking to you. I'll put all the information about your website in the bio. I really want to recommend that people see it. Thank you for being on the
Thank
program.
You so much.
Happy Passover too.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dean.
That was my conversation with Micah Siva, dietitian, chef, food writer, and more. There's a link to our website, Nosh with Micah, on the bio page. Next week, we have a great lineup. On Monday, we have Raquel Sharp from Charlie Cart on the program. The Charlie Cart Project is near to my heart. It's a nonprofit food education program supporting hands-on cooking nutrition education adaptable to any learning environment. It is available often at many libraries around the country, and the movement is growing all over the United States. I look forward to having you listen to that conversation on Monday. On Friday, we have Lily Ramirez Ferran on the program, who is a food writer from Ireland, and she's also a cooking school owner. She'll be on to talk about her life and her new book, Tacos, which is currently out now. I had a really good time talking to Lily, and I think you're going to love the conversation we had. I hope you all have a great weekend and can be back with us on Monday to enjoy another great interview. If you follow my podcast and enjoy it, you can buy me a coffee on the link in the bio. You can help us promote this podcast and share the episode with a friend on social media using the @welllibrarian tag. Follow the Well Seasoned Librarian podcast on Spotify and get notified when episodes are released. You can subscribe to the podcast newsletter and get updates on my articles and more at the link in the bio. Our podcast theme song, Talk About Love, is sung by the band Kitty Cat Fan Club. Their label, Asian Man Records, has given permission for its use. You can check them out and other bands and get albums and merchandise from them at asianmanrecords.com. Until next week, keep cooking.
I've been getting